Hi, Dr. C here to share another memory about a family member. And the family member of whom I'm going to talk today is my Uncle Marvin. My Uncle Marvin is one of my heroes. I loved him, and he was an amazing man. And he was there for his family. He went above and beyond for one of his sons. In fact, he probably saved the son's life and the son's wife's life as well, and their child, all three of them. A lot of psychologists would have told my Uncle Marvin that he was enabling him by giving him too much help, and it wasn't appropriate to help an adult child that way. But if it hadn't been for my uncle, I don't know that any of them would have survived or been okay. But that's not the story I'm here to tell you right now. In addition to being a psychologist and a ventriloquist, I also am the lay leader for a very small Jewish congregation in my community. Very, very, very small congregation. And one of my jobs as lay leader is that I have led the high holiday services at our temple for many years. Now, the high holidays are the most religious days of the year for Jews, the most sacred days of the year for Jews. And there's two of them. There's Rosh Hashanah, which means head of the year, which is the new year. And then there's Yom Kippur, which follows 10 days later, and that's the Day of Atonement. And that's considered the holiest day. And so that year, on Rosh Hashanah, I was running the service, and I realized when I arrived that I didn't have a good place to put my microphone. So I ended up hanging it on a chain that I had around my neck. Now, this chain had on it a Jewish star, a six-pointed star, a Mogen David. And I wore this jewelry all the time. I never took it off. My wife gave it to me, and I wore it all the time. I've got it on right now. And after the service ended, I couldn't extricate the microphone clip from the chain. So I took the chain off, and then I managed to get it apart, and then I just put it in my pocket because the chain's kind of tricky to reconnect. So I put it in my pocket, and when I got home, I put it on my dresser and forgot about it. I didn't put it back on. Well, within a few days, I was very ill, and I still, to this day, don't know what was the matter with me. But I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, I was really ill. I was so ill that 10 days later, I couldn't run the Yom Kippur services. And afterwards, as I was in bed on Yom Kippur, I'm thinking to myself, maybe I shouldn't have taken off my Jewish star on one of the most holy days of the Jewish calendar. So I put it back on again, and with a few days I felt better. Now, for me to tell you that I believe that putting the star on is what made me better, I'm not going to tell you that. I don't know. All I know is it didn't hurt, and I certainly got better after I put it back on again. And I told this story to the people at my synagogue, probably the next Jewish holiday. I told them what had happened the year before. And I didn't really share the story with many people. But later on, my uncle was quite old, and he was dying. And I went to visit him, and I decided to tell him this story, the story of the Mogen David. And he began to cry. And I said, "Why are you crying?" He says, "Well, you know that I spent almost my entire time while I was in the army during World War II in a Nazi prisoner of war camp in Germany. And during that entire time, as a Jew in the prisoner of war camp, I was wearing my mezuzah. Mezuzah is another holy item that a lot of Jews wear, or they put on the doorposts of their house and on their gates. It has prayers in it. And he said, I wore it the entire time, and I believed firmly that it was my good luck charm, and it kept me alive throughout my time in that camp. He says, and when you told that story, it triggered that memory. And I felt, number one, I felt glad that what I had shared with him had led to him sharing with me a story about his experience in that camp, because my uncle didn't talk about those things very much at all. And I thought the coincidence was interesting. I didn't anticipate somebody would identify with the story, let alone my uncle. And all I can say is that it was amazing to sit and listen to him share this really personal story about what happened to him that he probably hadn't shared with anybody, because his family didn't know the story either, hadn't shared with anybody ever since the war had ended. And on that note, I'll say bye for now. Hello, it's Dr. Sieg again, and I'm here with four more things about my Uncle Marvin. The first thing I entitle Close Encounter with a Tarantula. Every other summer, my mother, my sister, and I would go and visit my aunt and uncle in Albuquerque, and we would leave my father behind to continue to work in Detroit. And this was a time that I really got to know my aunt and my uncle better, particularly my uncle, because my aunt would come and visit us every other summer in Detroit, but the only times I saw my uncle was when we would go every 2 years to visit them. And I would play outside a lot. And one day while I was playing outside, I saw something in the dirt outside of their apartment. And it looked like a bunch of pipe cleaners wired together. And I thought, look, there's a bunch of pipe cleaners sitting in a hole, all wired together. And I decided to kind of, before I picked them up, I thought maybe I better poke at it with a stick just to make sure that's what it is. So I poked at it with a stick, and much to my surprise, it began to move. And that was when I realized that whatever it was alive. I became very frightened and ran back and said to my uncle, I just found something that I thought was pipe cleaners, and I poked at it with a stick and it moved. And he went outside with me and explained to me that it was a tarantula. So that was my close encounter with a tarantula, something I'd never seen in Detroit. And actually, that's the only time I ever saw one outside in any time in my life, actually. And apparently, if a tarantula bites you, it's not as bad as it could be, but it's not a pleasant thing either. It isn't going to kill you, but I'm glad as a little boy, maybe only 7 years old or 8 years old, that I avoided having a closer encounter with the tarantula. So that's the first close encounter. Now, my second close encounter that would do to my uncle is my close encounter with a Native American. I really wanted to meet a Native American and talk to him or her, and had never had that opportunity because we didn't have any around where I lived. So I would go to my uncle's store. My uncle and aunt owned a jewelry store in downtown Albuquerque, and they sold a lot of Indian jewelry along with other things. And Native Americans would come in to sell their jewelry at my uncle's store, my aunt and uncle's store. So one day I'm sitting outside of my uncle's store, just watching people walk by on Central Avenue in Albuquerque, US 66, and out of the door of the store comes a Native American. And I looked at him and looked up at him and bravely said, "How?" And he said, "Hello." And I was mortified. I was horribly embarrassed that I was saying this word and he was speaking back to me in proper English. Little did I know that Native Americans, many of them, most of them, spoke better English than I did at that point in time. So that was my close encounter with a Native American that was due to visiting my uncle's store. Okay, my third close encounter, while with my uncle, was, unbelievably as it sounds, my close encounter with hell. My aunt and uncle lived very close to the University of New Mexico. In fact, eventually it became part of the UNM campus. And every year for homecoming, the different groups would decorate for homecoming. And we were living right next to the Newman Center. Well, one year, the Newman Center decorated as if they were hell. And they had dry ice all over the place and smoke coming up and howling. And that was about as close to hell as I ever wanted to get. But there, when I looked out, there it was, my close encounter with hell. Now, my fourth close encounter with my uncle was my close encounter with baseball. You have to understand that I had an uncle in Detroit, Uncle Sonny, who took me to Major League Baseball games all the time. He used to work at the baseball stadium at what was called Briggs Stadium in those days. And so I would go see the Detroit Tigers play all the time. We would go several times during the season, and it was wonderful. I saw Al Kaline, I saw Colavito, I saw Keene, not only that, I saw the Yankees play, because the Tigers were a horrible major league team. We lost almost all of our games. We were always at the bottom in those days, but we frequently beat the New York Yankees, who were number one. So we were the Yankee killers. We beat the Yankees on a regular basis. So I saw Mickey Mantle. I saw all the famous Yankee players. And it was wonderful, except we sat in the bleachers. We were far away from the action. Now, Albuquerque also had a team at that point in time. It was the Albuquerque Dukes. And this was a minor league team, and it was D level. So it was about as low as you can get. And why I say this was my close encounter with baseball is because the stadium was small. We could sit right up front. You could see everything that was going on. That was the good news. The bad news is that it was very different from the Detroit ball team because the players were horrible. They couldn't catch the ball. It didn't compare at all. It was like an entirely different game. And one time I remember I was watching it and two players went after a fly ball and collided with each other and both fell to the ground. That was the kind of ball I saw when I saw the Dukes play. But another interesting fact is these players were not paid a lot of money. And if you hit a home run, if you were a local player who hit a home run, after you ran around the bases, you then took off your hat and ran around the edge of the stadium, and people put money in your hat because you weren't making enough money to live on from what you got paid for playing ball. And this was entirely different. And even though the quality wasn't as good, I could see it much better. And it was actually a lot of fun because you were in a stadium and you got to eat hot dogs and all the other things that you do at a baseball game. And you really were able to see the action. So that was my really close encounter with baseball. And that ends my close encounters with my Uncle Marvin. And I will continue in a minute. Take it easy. This is my final, last thing about my Uncle Marvin. And it's entitled Death with Dignity. And before I start it, I need to tell you that my contact with my Uncle Marvin taught me that people could die with dignity. As he got older, he became terminal, as we all do at some point in time. And he was put into the Veterans Hospital where they diagnosed that he was terminal and that he didn't have much longer to live. Now, because my uncle had been in a prisoner of war camp during World War II, he had a lot of extra privileges that he was unaware of. Nobody ever told him. They never told him that he should have been getting extra money every single month since World War II. And now it was too late to collect all that money. And they also never told him that he got special medical benefits at the Veterans Hospital. And again, he was ignorant of this almost his entire life, which is unfortunate because it's the responsibility of the military to make veterans aware of what privileges they have. And it really angered me that this had happened. But anyway, he was in the Veterans Hospital and they were treating him like a king. They gave him his private room. It was like a little apartment. They were waiting on him. They loved him. And they told him, they said, listen, you are going to die soon. And we can give you a really comfortable place in which to die. We can take good care of you. We can extend your life as far as possible because we're set up to do that. And we want you to stay here in the Veterans Hospital so that we can help these last days be pleasant and you can die with dignity. And my Uncle Marvin looked at them and he said, no. He says, I don't want to die in the hospital. I want to die at home with my family. I want to go home. And they said, really, you need to die here. This is better for you. He says, no, it isn't better for me. For me, it's better to be with my family. And he was demanding. So they gave the family a list of things they had to do to get their house ready for my uncle to go back there. And they worked at preparing it. And one of the things they had to do is they had a dog who was kind of aggressive at times. So they had to get a special place for the dog so the dog wouldn't attack my Uncle Marvin. And they got everything set up. And my Uncle Marvin went home. And he spent his final days at home with his family, just as he desired. And I was privileged to visit him during that time period. And what was amazing is that he was in a lot of pain, but he almost never complained. And he took some medicines to help with the pain, but he also didn't take very many of those medicines. And eventually, he died peacefully and happily in his sleep. And that's what we all want to do, die peacefully and happily in our sleep when our time comes. So I learned a lot from my Uncle Marvin. I will remember him forever. And on that note, I say bye for now. I need your wood. I'm Dr. C. I need fun wood. Real flesh, that's me. Psychologist. And Doctor Who are here because we care for you. Ta-da! Very good, Elwood. Thank you, Dr. C. That was kind of a sad story about Uncle Marvin. What do you mean it was sad? Well, he died. Well, everybody dies sometime, and he died with dignity, so it wasn't really that sad. It's just part of life. Oh, okay. So he died with dignity. Yes, he did. Are you going to die sometime? I'm going to die sometime. And I hope I can die with dignity the same way that my Uncle Marvin did. I hope so, too. Am I going to die? Well, not necessarily. What do you mean, not necessarily? Either I am or I'm not. Well, You might die, but also it's possible that somebody will take over for me and take care of making you stay alive.
I don't understand.
Well, remember when we were in Japan and you met Mallory Lewis and Lamb Chop?
Yeah, they were cool. I got to talk to both of them, and I liked them a lot. I did, yeah.
Well, Mallory was not the original person who started Lamb Chop.
She wasn't?
No, she wasn't. The original person who started Lamb Chop was Sherry Lewis, Mallory's mother.
Oh, and did she die too?
Yes, she died too.
And then Mallory took her over?
That's correct.
Was Lamb Chop still just the same?
Lamb Chop was very much the same.
How can that be?
Well, it was because Sherry did a good job with her, and Mallory was with them a lot, and Mallory learned how to make Lamb Chop pretty much the same way she was when her mother was alive.
Wow. Well, can that happen for me as well?
Yes, it can.
Who can take over for me?
Well, either one of my sons can do it. Both of them know how you talk, what you sound like, and the kinds of things you say.
They do?
Of course they do. They've been around you for years.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So, in some ways, I'm stronger than you are, 'cause I don't have to ever die.
Well, that's true, but you know what? In a lot of ways, I don't have to die either.
You just told me you had to die.
Well, not necessarily. After I die, I still live on through my children.
You do?
Of course I do, and maybe even grandchildren. Who knows?
Who knows?
And my Uncle Marvin is living on through his children and his grandchildren.
Wow. So in certain ways, you guys never die either. We're a lot alike.
That's right, we're a lot alike. And on that note, I think it's time for your last word. Do you have anything else you want to say?
I do. Here it comes.
A poem by Elwood Splinter. The name of my poem is Uncle Marvin.
Dr. C's Uncle Marvin was a really good guy.
It made us all sad when he went home to die. He had a good life with his family and friends. Although his dying was sad, he died with dignity. The end.
And that's it for now. See you all later. Adios. Bye-bye. Sayonara. Ciao. Tschüss. Shalom. I'll be back.